In 1730, on a riverbank in Osaka, men were betting fortunes on rice that hadn't been harvested yet. Some of it hadn't even been planted. Which raises a strange question. What kind of grain becomes valuable enough for people to gamble on a harvest that doesn't even exist? To answer that, we have to go back much further than Osaka, 9,000 further. Somewhere along the Yangtze River, wild grass became something else, a crop that didn't just feed a family for a season, but could feed entire civilizations. Rice went on to do something almost no other plant on Earth has ever managed. Today, it's the staple food for more than 3 billion people. 1 out of every 4 calories eaten on this planet comes from this single grass seed. And that changed everything.
Rice didn't just feed people, it multiplied them. In the 11th century, a fast-growing variety called champa rice arrived in southern China from what is now Vietnam. Farmers could harvest it so quickly that many were suddenly growing 2 crops where they had once grown 1. Think about what that means. The same land, the same farmer, twice the food. The results were extraordinary. Over the next 2 centuries, China's population roughly doubled, crossing 100 million people for the first time in human history. And this is the pattern to remember. More rice didn't just mean fewer hungry people. It meant more taxpayers, more workers, more soldiers, more empire. Rice had become a source of political power, and once the food becomes a source of power, losing control of it is no longer just a food problem, it's a government problem. And once governments realized their power depended on rice, the next step was almost inevitable. Which brings us back to Osaka. By the 1700s, Japan had taken the idea of rice as power further than almost anyone else. Samurai didn't collect salaries, they collected rice. Farmers paid taxes in rice. A lord's rank was measured by how much rice his land could produce. So when merchants in Osaka started trading paper contracts for rice that hadn't been harvested yet, the shogun didn't shut it down. In 1730, he legalized it. The result was the world's first organized futures market. And if you're enjoying these hidden stories behind everyday things, consider subscribing, because this grain is about to do something even stranger. 3 centuries before traders on Wall Street were betting on oil and wheat, merchants in Japan were already betting on rice harvests that didn't exist yet. Because rice wasn't a side dish in Japan, it was money. And a country whose money also has to be eaten by its own citizens faces a problem that gold-backed economies never have to solve. What happens when the money runs low and people are hungry at the same time? And 2 centuries later, that question would help bring down an entire government. Uozu is a small fishing town on Japan's northern coast. In the summer of 1918, rice prices climbed so quickly that many fishermen's families could no longer afford the food they depended on every day. For some households, rice wasn't just becoming expensive, it was disappearing from the table. So the fishermen's wives walked down to the docks, not to stop a shipment of weapons, not to protest a war, to stop rice from leaving their town while their own families went hungry. It should have ended there, a local dispute, forgotten by winter. It didn't. Word spread along the coast, then inland, then into the cities. What started as a complaint about food prices was becoming something much bigger. Within weeks, what started with a handful of women had reached nearly 500 towns and cities across Japan. Between 1 and 2 million people took to the streets, warehouses were stormed, rice merchants' shops were burned. At its core, the problem was simple. Wartime inflation had sent rice prices soaring. Speculators were holding back stock, waiting for prices to climb even higher, and the government was buying huge amounts of rice to feed soldiers being sent to Siberia while ordinary citizens struggled to buy dinner. By September, the unrest had done something no election, no petition, and no newspaper editorial had managed in decades. It brought down the government of Prime Minister Terauchi Masatake. If that surprised you, wait until you hear what some governments did next to make sure it never happened again. A government had just learned in the most painful way possible what happens when a country loses control of the one food its entire system depends on. It would not be the last government to learn that lesson. Some governments watched what happened in Japan and decided they would never let it get that far. 54 years after Uozu, a different government decided not to wait for its own riot. In 1972, under martial law, the Philippine government reached a conclusion that would sound extreme almost anywhere else. If you hid enough rice from the market, the state could walk into your warehouse and take it from you. Hoarding rice stopped being a bad business practice. It became a crime, one the government was willing to use armed inspectors to stop. And that instinct never really disappeared. Decades later, large-scale rice smuggling was classified as a crime against the nation itself. In 2023, officials capped rice prices and raided warehouses looking for hoarded stock. At Manila's port, they found nearly 900 shipping containers filled with rice sitting unclaimed, waiting. But here's the uncomfortable part. Everyone agreed hoarding was wrong. Nobody could fully agree on who the hoarder actually was. A smuggler? A trader waiting for a better price tomorrow? Or a food system that had never closed the gap between the farmer growing the rice and the family trying to buy it back? And then a single decision made thousands of miles away showed just how fragile that system really was. Then the largest rice exporter on Earth made a decision that would reach more than 100 countries almost overnight. In July 2023, India banned exports of non-basmati rice, and India isn't just another exporter. Nearly 40% of all rice traded internationally comes from India. So when India stopped selling, the world noticed. Fast. Prices jumped across continents, families thousands of miles away. People who had never seen an Indian rice field suddenly found dinner getting more expensive. Global rice prices climbed to their highest level since the food crisis of 2008. Economists later estimated the decision erased close to $2 billion from the global economy. A policy made in Delhi had quietly helped determine what dinner would cost for families who had no vote in that decision at all. Which means the strange question we started with still hasn't gone away. Most foods are commodities. You grow them, you sell them, and if the price moves, people complain and move on. Rice never got to be ordinary. It became money in Japan. It became population and empire in China. It became the difference between a government standing or falling in the streets of Uozu. And even today, it helps decide what families in Manila, Lagos, or Jakarta pay for dinner based on decisions made in warehouses, ports, and government offices they will never see. That's the real answer to the question we started with. Rice wasn't made illegal to hoard because it's precious. It was made illegal to hoard because too many people in too many places have learned the hard way what happens when it runs out. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history behind the things we use, eat, and depend on every day. And let me know in the comments, what's another ordinary object with an extraordinary history? I might cover it next. I'll see you in the next one.